Hey all, what is up? Keasbey here, and today's gonna be a quick and rough video for my updated Memento deck profile. Again. But before getting into all that, don't forget to drop this video a like and subscribe to the channel for even more. So before we get into the profile, if you're new or returning, a quick bit of channel health stuff. Noticeably, my upload schedule has been a little bit sparse lately. Short version of the story, work has been super busy. If you don't know, I don't do YouTube as my only job. My actual full-time job does overlap with a lot of what I do for YouTube as a graphic designer. So doing that all day, it's a little bit tiring, coming back and then, editing videos for more hours into the night. So that said though, I am trying to mentally refresh, get back to uploading videos more consistently. And we've got some good stuff down the pipeline, so definitely keep an eye out between TCG and Let's Play content stuff. Anyway, too long, didn't read for this section. Don't neglect your mental health. It is arguably as important as your physical health. Okay, so with that channel health bit out of the way, let's talk about Memento. So this is going to be a deck profile update. I'm not going to be going as in-depth as I usually would. However, if you're new to the deck, either picking it up in TCG because it is really picking up steam, or it just came out in Master Duel, check out the first deck profile that I posted. The list itself, and I can't stress this enough, is out of date. I'm going to call out anywhere in that list where I think it's incorrect as we go through this one, but use that previous video as a guide for the card effects, rulings, mechanics, and all the combos that I talk about in there that this deck is capable of. All of that content is still correct and relevant. So again, this video, list, previous video, mechanics. All right, so with that all out of the way, let's go ahead and kick this off. We are on triple copies of Memento Darkblade. Just another quick note, I know it's Mementotlan, I call it Memento. I think Memento sounds better. Triple copies of Memento Anguish. We're on triple copies of Memento Tatsuno Toshigo. First call out to that reference video. I talk a little bit about thinking about playing 2 of these. That is absolutely incorrect. You want to be on 3 of these. I'm so sorry. It was a very early test build with the Legacy of Destruction stuff. I was young. I was foolish. It was so far in the past. I'm not that person anymore, and I apologize for it. 1 copy each of Mace, Goblin, and Gaddock. Once again, this is another one that I think the ratios in that initial video were incorrect. By the time I got to my second deck profile, I had gone down to the 1-1-1 split on these. It's a tighter deck list. You only need 1 of each of these cards, and even opening them as 1-ofs doesn't really affect your end board too much. It is very easy to rework your combos in a way where you don't actually lose out on any value by seeing these in your open. I do just want to take a quick note to mention that this deck, one of its main strengths is how malleable all the combo lines are. I'm still finding different lines of play to get from point A to point B with like really awkward and weird hands and board states. So this deck very, very much rewards you for just playing it a ton and really internalizing what it does and what it wants to do. 1 copy of Memento Horned Dragon. Definitely check out the combos in that original video. You can do some really fun stuff with this card in Bone Party and Gaddock. 1 copy of Memento Combined Creation. I've always been playing 1, but I am starting to see a split between top decks that are playing 1 copy of this and top decks that are playing 2 copies of this. So let's just talk about that really quick. I personally prefer 1 copy as it's one of those cards that if you don't get to the point where you're searching it natively, there is a decent chance that you aren't going to be able to even summon it, given that it needs 5 separate Memento names to be summoned. Additionally, I haven't seen EDOPro in some time. The Earth attribute gives it immunity to Bystials as well. Call by the Grave is still an issue, but if you're going first, they're going to have to then remove it from their field on their turn and then use Call by the Grave afterwards in order to banish it. And that's assuming that they haven't already used Call by on one of our generic hand traps or mace or something like that. Bonus as well, because it's Earth attribute, it is incredibly hard to super poly this card off of the field. And the worm typing just makes it even more difficult. So that's my defense of 1 copy. I will make the case for 2 copies, however. Opening Combined Creation is not detrimental in that it makes Bone Party or the Twin Dragon Pop to Search effect essentially free, since we don't care so much about Combined Creation being in the graveyard. Plus, if you open Combined Creation, you can use one of those Twin Dragon searches to get Mace into your hand, which makes another new card in our extra deck really solid. We'll talk about that when we get there. And plus, all of this does give us an additional body to work with on field as well. I personally prefer one though, all that being said, as I feel that second Combined Creation could just be a play extender in my hand, such as Bone Party or Fusion or something that will help me if my plays get interrupted. I don't necessarily think the 2 is incorrect, but I've mentioned this in other videos. My deck building philosophy tends to be I want to run the bare minimum within reason to still have a well-oiled deck. Obviously, we wouldn't run 1 copy of Darkblade just for the sake of running a minimum, as that's going to affect the deck in a major way, but I feel it's a negligible difference between 1 or 2 copies of Combined Creation. That's it for our Memento monsters. Let's get into the Memento spells and traps. So my biggest point of shame for the reference video is going to be the field spell. We're on 1 copy now, and for the sake of my own pride, I will mention that by the time I did my second list, and I had time more to play with the deck, I had dropped down from 3 to 1. 1 is genuinely all you need for this card. With the exception of the 1 card Tatsuno Otoshigo open, using this in your opening versus using it when you search it out natively in a combo doesn't really change the math that much, beyond just freeing up one of your spell trap searches that you have access to. It's a very strong field spell, but the deck has remarkably easy access to it. And the other thing is that it doesn't offer any additional resources via its effect. Rather, it just gives you more usage of the resources that you've already got into rotation otherwise. Triple copies of Memento Bone Party. I cannot believe that at the time of recording this is a $40 card, but here we are. Triple copies of Memento Fusion. So my previous builds were on 2 copies of this, and it functioned perfectly fine. But having a 3rd copy has been really solid, and I have to admit, I do think it's the better move. Once again, we're all learning from our past mistakes. Forgive past me for mine. Closing out this portion of the deck, we're on 1 copy of Memento Cranium Burst. I just have a little bit to say about this card that has been covered in previous videos, but I think it's worth reiterating. First of all, because this deck is going to see more play in paper now, there is a secondary effect on Cranium Burst that is often overlooked in that your opponent must attack with anything that has the ability to attack into your biggest Memento monster. It's come up now playing in paper a few times that my opponent has tried to go, okay, main phase 1 end, go to end phase, and they don't know that they can't do that. And it's on me as the person who actually knows how Memento works to call that out and say, no, you have to attack Combined Creation a few times. Next up, I do just want to emphasize again that this is a once per chain effect. It is multiple times per turn, but it is only once per chain. This is very relevant in something like an SP Little Knight, where there is that on-summon trigger effect potentially if they're special summoning her properly. And then there is a quick effect ignition that can be used on the same chain. So if your opponent goes Chain Link 1, SP Little Knight, you go Chain Link 2, Cranium Burst, attempting to negate SP Little Knight. Your opponent can now go Chain Link 3, SP Little Knight's ignition effect. So you can't really do anything about that second effect because it's all in the same chain. And like I said, and I'm just saying this a bunch to reiterate it because it's very important, Cranium Burst is only once per chain. Obviously, this doesn't exclusively apply to SP Little Knight, so just keep that in mind whenever you see a multi-effect monster. And now we're on to our hand traps. We're in triple copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spraying. I bumped it up to 3 copies. A bunch of reasons, but the biggest one is the amount of times I've played against Tenpai now, played through their entire hand, and then once they hit battle phase, they just have the quick play to completely OTK me. It makes me really sad, and having that Ash Blossom has just been amazing for that circumstance. Triple copies of Infinite Impermanence. This is just a generically very strong hand trap. Double copies of Effect Veiler. I like having that little bit of extra bonus effect negation. Biru. So I do want variety, and I don't just want to go everything as monster negation. But we're only on 2 copies of Nibiru here because it's been feeling a little bit hit or miss right now. Some matchups it's been absolutely great, turn ending. Some matchups it hasn't come up at all. Some matchups it has lowered the ceiling on a board without totally stopping it. And some matchups, like something like Voiceless Voice, for example, that even if they do go over 5 summons, a lot of times they'll just have an in-archetype Omni Negate that's been sitting there since like summon number 3. 1 copy in the main deck didn't really feel worth playing, plus we aren't on Cross-Out Designator anymore. but I didn't want to completely drop it from the main deck, so bumping it up to 2 felt like the nice middle ground there. And again, we've already got 5 direct monster negation hand traps in the main, and a couple of more in the side deck as well. Double copies of Ghost Ogre. This is, again, for a bit of variety, but I am really liking Ghost Ogre right now. It stops the Tenpai field spell, it hits all of the Voiceless Voice back row, it has good utility against Yubel with Nightmare Pain and Eternal Favorite, it hits Magnificent Map in the Flandreese matchup, and despite not negating, it can be an awkward interruption to certain boards if your opponent needs a specific amount or a specific type of monster on field. Even just being a little bit of removal can really mess up their plays and potentially lower the ceiling of what they're trying to do. And now we're on to our generic play pushers. We're on 1 copy of Reinforcement of the Army. This is one that I've seen cut from some lists. It seems like a 50-50 split as to whether or not other decks are playing it, and I'll talk about if I were to cut this out of the deck, what I would play over it in just a second. 1 copy of 1 for 1. Same thing, there seems to be like a 50-50 split, people playing this, people not playing it. However, I think this one is arguably way more important and way more necessary to play than Reinforcement of the Army, as this can jumpstop a broken line of play in ways that Rhoda just cannot, given that it's a direct special summon from the deck. Double copies of Prosperity. So this is where if you don't want to play Rhoda, you could play a 3rd copy of Prosperity over it, or alternatively play both and just play a 41 card deck. But let's talk about the differences. Reinforcement of the Army is a guaranteed Darkblade. Obviously, it has to resolve, but yeah, if it does, free Darkblade. Prosperity, however, while it is incredibly strong, isn't really guaranteeing us anything. That said, 3 copies of Prosperity does have the advantage of helping get into side deck cards, or potentially finding a Bone Party or a Fusion. Remember, Darkblade isn't our only 1-card starter, and we could find a different 1-card starter off of Prosperity potentially. So I'm back and forth really on what I want to do here, so I did just want to make a mention of that potential alternative that you could do. But 2 Prosperity, 1 Rhoda has been feeling good so far, but I am definitely considering 3 Prosperity, no Rhoda. And closing out our main deck, we are on double copies of Triple Tactics Talent. This deck is very consistent at playing through like a singular copy of Ash or Valor, so getting to fire this off to snipe an additional interaction out of our opponent's hand potentially while giving us full knowledge is just absolutely beautiful, and it does so much. Worst case scenario though, we draw 2 and we hopefully draw into a play extender or something like that. Just remember, this does conflict with Prosperity. You can't draw 2 via talents if you've used Prosperity, and vice versa. You can't use Prosperity if you've drawn 2 off of talents. Okay, so that does it for the main deck. Let's get into the extra deck. We're on 2 copies of Memento Twin Dragon, which I think is correct, and it seems to be what the rest of the Memento world has agreed upon now. 1 copy of Guardian Chimera, just overall a super great card. 1 copy of Chimera King of the Phantom Beast. It's a little bit niche, but it comes up here and there, and it's just nice to have. 1 copy of Magnum the Reliever. So I've come around to this card, especially now that I'm playing 3 copies of Fusion in the main. It doesn't come up super often, but it is one of those cards that's just nice to have in my back pocket for niche case scenarios. That's it for the fusions. The rest of our cards are links. We're on 1 copy of Relinquished Anima. 1 copy of Dark the Dark Charmer. 1 copy of Selene, Queen of the Master Magicians. And again, I cannot stress enough, Anguish is an in-archetype spellcaster, so that comes up pretty often when you're link laddering. And at the top of that aforementioned link ladder, we have got access code Talker. New card to the extra deck. We're on 1 copy of Herald of Mirage Lights. This is the one that we alluded to when we were talking about getting Mace into our hand at the end of our turn. It's absolutely a beautiful card for this deck, as one of this deck's weaknesses is that it doesn't have any answer to spells and traps. This does give us one, and it's very easy to just discard the Mace and then get it back into our hand later in the turn via our other plays. So we're not losing out on using Mace's native ability by discarding her for Mirage Lights. And now what I have just been calling the girl gang of this deck. We're on 1 copy of IP Masquerena. She combos incredibly well with Mace, letting us go into basically anything that we're about to list off here. We've got 1 copy of her best friend, SP Little Knight. We have got 1 copy of Apollosa, Bow of the Goddess. There are ways to end our board with a 3 to 4 material Appaloosa, depending on if you want to exchange one of her negations for IP Masquerade's protection effect on her. Having Oppo and Cranium Burst on field does let you negate multiple effects in the same chain. Plus, Appaloosa does negate from locations that Cranium Burst can't, which is really, really cool. But that tends to be more of a game 2 or 3 situation when you know that you need to go heavy on those direct reaction monster negations. You can also just make her on your opponent's turn with IP Masquerade as well if that feels like the appropriate move, so you don't necessarily have to end on her either. Underworld Goddess of the Closed World. Again, this is just another card that's really fun to potentially make off of IP Masquerade. And a new addition to the girl gang, we have Sky Striker Ace Azalea. She's a really nice piece of spot removal with the actual upside that if you don't have enough spells in your graveyard, she'll remove herself from the field alongside whatever she's destroying, which doesn't sound great on paper, but it opens up our board to special summon out Tatsu since he can't have a non-memento face up on the field to special summon himself. So definitely a nice piece of spot removal to have as an option if you then need to combo off afterwards. And now the side deck. I'm going to say right now my side deck is in a little bit of a weird spot right now. I'm testing a few different things, so I'm not sure necessarily if this is the most optimized side deck I could be playing. But like I said, I did just want to get this deck profile out as quickly as possible, and the deck's been working very well with this side deck so far. I'm just never happy with something in its current state. I always want to improve it somehow. We've got a third copy of Nibiru, just to round out the playset for matchups where Nibiru is very strong. We've got 2 copies of Ghost Mourner and Moonlit Chill for when Ghost Ogre isn't really the best move. Ghost Mourner does kind of like fit into this interesting niche of negating in a location where Effect Veil and Infinite Permanence kind of miss out on, specifically if your opponent is special summoning outside of the main phase and you can't drop Imperm from hand for whatever reason, or you don't have Imperm. Effect Veiler misses that because it's only main phase, but Ghost Mourner can hit that. And even more, if your opponent's special summoning during your turn, Ghost Mourner is very nice for that niche case scenario. 1 copy of Harpy's Feather Duster and double copies of Cosmic Cyclone, specifically for back row removal. You could arguably play Twin Twister here. The discard cost isn't that bad for this deck. I just personally like that Cosmic Cyclone banishes whatever you're hitting, whereas Twin Twister puts it in the graveyard, so anything that has like an in-graveyard effect can still be used, and if there's any way of recovering it easily from the graveyard, I just prefer it to be totally gone and banished with Cosmic. 1 copy of Fracture Dance, so this left the main deck in exchange for the 3rd copy of Fusion. I haven't really missed it in the main deck, but there are definitely matchups where I do want to have it, so having it in the side deck for games 2 and 3 has been really nice. Triple copies of Evenly Matched, just generically good for going second. Triple copies of Solemn Judgment. Even with Herald of Mirage Light, this deck does still have kind of a weakness to not having a way to interact with spells and traps. So while we can play without our back row if we get hit by like a Duster or something like that, having access to an additional way to negate a back row wipe or a board clear is really helpful in games 2 or 3 when we can expect those to be coming in. And lastly, the final 2 cards in our side deck are a little bit of a flex spot, but I've been playing around with 2 copies of Unending Nightmare. It's really fun. I might be a bit too heavy on back row destruction in this side deck, but I do like the fact that it is a reusable piece of back row destruction. Even if it only applies to face-up back row, it's been really great in matchups like Voiceless Voice. Even Kashtira sometimes, you know, you'll hit their field spell and then you can hit Birth afterwards. And it does let you reserve that Herald of Mirage Light negation for something that Unending Nightmare can't necessarily interact with. So that's the deck that I've been playing. If you're coming here from us playing against each other on EDOPro, you've already seen this in action. And if not, definitely try this deck out for yourself. It is a ton of fun. And I wanted to make sure I got my update in quickly since it's seeing a lot more attention now than ever, and I think rightfully so. This is a very strong deck. Again, use this video as the deck list. Use the previous video that I've been referencing for card effects, rulings, mechanics, and combos, but I can't stress this enough. Do not use that previous video for a list. There are things that I think are objectively incorrect in that video. If you enjoyed this video though, don't forget to drop it a like and subscribe to the channel for even more, and I will catch you all later.